Hello, I'm Shawn Kenney, and I'm here playing a little more Kerbal Space Program. I was going to try and get a Kethane Rover to Duna and see what we could do there. So I've put together some footage of my build process. Initially, on the top there is putting a satellite. So I figure I'm going to, when I get to Duna, I'm going to put that in orbit, so that'll start scanning, and then I can send the rover down to actually mine some Kethane. And so I just sort of build from the top, from the command pod, sort of thinking, how am I going to get these guys back? Trying to keep that in mind, and then I just start building from there. So it sort of speeded up the process. This pretty much took me all yesterday that I was working on. Various iterations, basically just trying to put together, test it out, see how everything holds up. So you can see, generally with rovers, especially on Kerbal, when they're pretty heavy, it damages wheels pretty easily. So it is a good stress test as far as figuring out what you need to strap down, all the parts that you need on it. And so I just keep revising it, going through, trying to think of everything I'm going to need, whether power supply, Kethane storage, and there I'm testing out the solar panel action groups. Just making sure everything seems to be holding together, the ladders work, that the Kerbals can actually use them. Well, it's much harder to use them in the heavier gravity of Kerbal. But we figured we'd just leave them because we're going to destroy that and keep working on it. And so now I start working on some booster stages, just trying to figure out what the best way to lift this is. It's a pretty heavy rover as it is, so I'm going to have to use a lot of rockets to get this into the sky. And I'm also thinking of, I want an orbital translation phase that will get me to Duna, that I'm not going to be using a lot of the fuel off my actual rover itself. But each process is, figure out what failed and go strap that down. And see this, the first attempt didn't work. I think I accelerated there, and the capsule ended up being destroyed, even though the parachute was out. And so I was playing around with this design, figuring if I lifted, each section of the rover independently, it would, make it a little more even. But I was having a few troubles with it. I like putting a little bit of RCS on the capsule itself, so that you can kind of avoid the hail of debris during catastrophic situations. As you can see, this really wasn't working out very well for me. Very narrow miss there. So, that, try figuring out taking a different approach at it. Maybe this might be a little bit more stable, although I think I was fueling all these into the center tank, and as usually what happens is that these can get a little bit top heavy, and while everything's going fine, once you're down to the last tank, it's too top heavy to really control. So I had to abort this one. I thought I might be able to recover a little bit, but I really didn't have the velocity at that point, and I couldn't get the spin under control either. But that's rocket science right there. Like I say, you just avoid the hail of debris and let the parachutes take care of them. So then, try modifying it a little bit. It's more or less the same design, although at this point I'm not cross-fueling these bottom ones. I'm just going to let them all burn together and then drop the whole thing as a section. And that works a little bit better. Definitely better, actually. Gets you a little bit of a spin sometimes, but It's not too bad. I think at this point I realized I didn't have enough fuel to actually make orbit, so I separated myself from that. Decided to let the Kerbals live this time. And, here's re-entry. I thought, love that effect. It'll be right now it doesn't have any negative effect, but I suppose one of these days it will. So once again, go back, redesign. That's I'm trying. Basically, at that point, that middle stage is just trying to finalize my orbit. The big orange tanks are just going to get me up with a peak at about 80 or 90 kilometers. Then I rely on this next stage to actually circularize my orbit. In that case, it didn't quite have enough once again, so I abandoned it and gave it a little more boosters. And something happened there. Just I broke the bottom connectors for some reason. Or I think what happens sometimes you pull them off and put them back on, and the struts don't reattach. So I had to go in and make sure those were all reattached, because as you can see, you get a little bit of a noodle-legged rockets there. And yeah, that's when I realized. So redid all the struts, so nothing was going to move anywhere. And at that point, I was still using those solid boosters to try and get off the ground, but I think at this point I was realizing it was just not going to be quite enough. I think at this point, yeah, I was down to my nuclear rockets, and we were entering the atmosphere, so it was not going to happen at that point. Good thing re-entry doesn't do much damage, because yeah, we would have burned up real nice there. Especially spinning around like I was there, trying to orientate myself. And so, once again, when some big rockets don't work, use bigger rockets. And this ended up being more or less my final design. That seems to be giving me quite a bit of thrust to get this heavy payload into at least the start of an orbit. At this point, then those solid boosters and the aerospike engines can help me circularize, and I can use a little bit of the fuel in the last one with the Poodle engine, and I can turn the nuclear rockets on at that point and just start burning them all. Then this, using the nuclear engines, I get out, and then we start working on our approach to Duna. At this point, I do have to watch it because I've shut off my two side engines so that it'll only draw from that bottom engine. And once that's done, then I discard it. Then I have to stop my burn, turn on the two side engines, and then restart my burn so it doesn't start, burning them at uneven levels. But I like having that bottom tank there because it's sort of the least amount. You're just taking one extra fuel tank and you can drop it. You don't have to turn around, or it doesn't drop off a large section of the tank. So at this point, I was getting my satellite into circumpolar orbit, or as much as I could. I still have a little bit of maneuvering fuel left in the satellite if we want to get it. It's not perfectly circumpolar, but it's pretty good, which should be sufficient. I'm going to have to let it run for a little while to actually do the scanning. I let it scan for a little bit here, but I'm just going to have to let it run at one point to really fully map out the planet's Kethane deposits. But of course, with 0.21 coming out any time now, many suspect, and it would make sense, tomorrow, the July 20th, is going to be the anniversary of the Apollo moon landing, so that would be somewhat appropriate. So I was trying to be a lot, doing the first attempt here at Duna. not quite sure how these 4 nuclear engines are going to perform. But around this point, I think I'm starting to realize that it's not going to be quite enough. We're coming in really rather quickly, and we're not slowing down nearly fast enough. So I tried ditching that and hoping maybe that will give us a little bit more response, but alas, it was not to be. Slammed hard into the surface of Duna. So we slight modifications, added some parachutes, and trying again. So here we go. I think I had a couple struts there. Something came loose at one point. So this was Duna Kethane Rover Attempt 2. And yeah, more or less the same. I think I added some parachutes, some drogue chutes. Did end up firing that middle stage a little earlier than I would have liked, but it worked out. I ended up doing several orbits and taking advantage of the Olberth effect to well, actually, I think I did that one 2 cycles. I think some other later ones I've had to use a few more attempts, but yeah, you know, if you're starting to get too far away from the periapsis while you're doing your burn to get into interplanetary orbit, you know, you can always wait another orbit until you come back and burn while you're going close to the periapsis to really maximize the amount of fuel you have. And so now we're doing our long burn to Duna, and now our deceleration. And thankfully we can accelerate the time because I think each one of these burns was about 7.5, 8 minutes long. So here we, I think actually took advantage of having a slight intercept with the Duna's moon, and that sort of slowed me down a bit and put me into an orbit, so I took advantage of that. And I found like a Kethane deposit there, so looked like a fairly large one. So we attempted to land here. We get the chutes out. The drogue chutes go first to help slow us down, but then we use the regular chutes for the final. But I was definitely being a lot more cautious, realizing I was going to have to do almost a continuous burn as I was decelerating, because you really have to be there's not a lot of response. Even with the 4 nuclear engines, the craft is really heavy, and it's not going to respond quickly to anything. You know, even if I'm going max speed, it's slowly decelerating me, but it's you know, I haven't quite figured out the perfect altitude to start burning. You know, you're always cautiously trying to figure out, well, okay, I have this much fuel, and should I start decelerating now? Will I have enough time to decelerate, or what's going to happen? So as this is the final approach. I think where is landing here is on a sort of a larger plateau, because it seems to land us at a couple thousand meters up. But here the final parachutes go, and the other thing I'm also worried about is am I going to decelerate enough and then start going up, at which point the chutes disappear, and then I'm going to be left just on the rockets, which would be a little bit of concern. But I think what ended up happening here was I wasn't quick enough to see. I should have killed my thrust just a few seconds before, because it ended up lifting me back up and we toppled over. So we found a Kethane field. We got a Kethane Rover at the target, just not quite upright and in one piece, unfortunately. All the Kerbal survived, though. They're rather thrilled with it. So there's been my Kethane to Duna attempt so far. Maybe what I'll do is try and rescue them, get a Kethane miner back on Duna. Hopefully this one will be upright. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. Bye.